It's disorganized play. I got the dog a little worked up with that intro, you guys. I don't think you heard. There's there's some growling going on over here. I have my dog home today. He had to go to the vet this morning. So now I cannot turn the camera on him. I'm sorry, everyone. That's you have to follow my Twitter if you want to see pictures of my dog. That's mostly what it's there for. That and my raucous political opinions. But if you follow me at the Dungeon Bastard, you get my undistilled brilliance and wisdom when it comes to all things Dungeons and the Dragons. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I am glad you are here with me in the interrogation chamber. Please give me my last cigarette and the legal pad so that I can sign away my personal confession as to exactly what happened in the Tomb of Horrors. Hey, everybody. Also, the mailman's here. That mailman... I have to stop the stream when the mailman shows up. The stream's over. I'm sorry. So, today we are going to talk about finishing Chapter 8, starting Chapter 4. Does that make sense? Kind of. I will give a recap of the recap. We'll talk about what I need to do to get Chapter 8 wrapped up. We're going to talk about kind of traveling, setting up Chapter 4, and then hopefully what we need to do to really prep and get things rolling with Chapter 4. So that's our agenda for the day. We have 58 minutes to accomplish this. If you have questions or what have you along the way, I will try to address them as long as it's not like huge game-related philosophical discussions that will take tens of minutes. We'll reserve that for Thursday when I do the recap. But if you have a question or something, or you need clarification on what's going on in the game, you're just catching up, that's fine. Drop them in the chat here, and I'll try to quick rip off a reply to you guys. So, thanks everyone for joining me. If you did not catch the recap show on Thursday, here's the hopefully brief and short version of exactly what happened last session, right? So, the players had formulated a plan. They were going to pose as slavers. They polymorphed Jorgen into a spider. The half-elf Drow, you know, he's Drow on the elven side of his heritage, dressed himself up to look like a full Drow, and they were going to pose as... They brought a squad of 10 dwarves along to pose as slaves that the Drow was going to attempt to sell off. This plan did not work as well as intended. They ended up getting in a fight with Brimskarda, the fire giant duchess, and a salamander and a fire giant guard. But fortunately, with Jorgen's prowess, they managed to defeat those three of them, and they actually took Brimskarda captive. They then decided to do a short rest for an hour, which tipped off the rest of the fortress since she was gone so long and nobody came back to say anything that something weird something was up. She proposed, you know what, if you want to make a prisoner exchange, I'm sure my husband has something that you want. Go make a deal with him. They tried to kind of prime her for some more information. She wasn't particularly forthcoming. They tried to make a bargain with her, and she's like, I have no leverage here. I'm not going to promise you anything. Anything I'd promise you would be built on false, pretenses. So don't start with me. If you want to make a deal, go, get your courage up and go cut a deal with the guy who has the power. Which they decided to do. So they opened the doors to the elevator shaft and were greeted by 4 fire giants. Brimskarda told them to stand down. They went down the elevator shaft, basically directly to Duke Zalto, who was waiting there with 4 more fire giants and 2 hellhounds, and they cut a deal where they got Jorgen's axe and safe passage out of Iron Slag in exchange for Brimskarda's life, which, by the book, like, that's anything short of cutting a deal related to the Forge is, or related to the Iron Colossus and reforging the Iron Colossus. That's all legit, right? So that's fine. That worked out. Unfortunately, they walked into the main workshop and saw the adamantine Colossus, the Voinendod, and decided we can't let this stand. And so they murdered Jorgen / Harshnag murdered Brimskarda, and then they started this giant fight with 4 fire giants and Duke Zalto and 2 hellhounds, and they almost got pasted. So, like, ironically, they started this fight and they were just getting, like, hammered, which of course they're gonna, it's 4 fire giants, 5 fire giants, 2 hellhounds. They're gonna get hammered. Somehow they got the idea that they should focus fire on one of the minion fire giants and not take out the boss first thing. I'm like, okay, the minions aren't that much weaker than Duke Zalto, but whatever. Fortunately, through some strategic spellcraft by the Bard, some attacks of opportunity, and then just the fact that Jorgen is a combat machine, they managed to drop Duke Zalto, at which point Jorgen said, I claim, domain over the complex. You fire giants swear allegiance to me, and I will let you go. And that was, just sort of a quick dashed off comment because the store was closing. We had to roll, and that was the end of the end of the session. So not bad. That's literally a 5-minute recap. That's what happened. It turned into 2 big fights. So there ended up being a fight back in the Yak Folk Village again, which I am so glad to be moving on. We have fought so many combats in that Yak Folk Village. And then it ended up being a big fight that they initiated. They did not have to start a fight with Duke Zalto. Jorgen could have taken his axe and they could have traded off Brimskarda and walked out of there and come back a different time or sent somebody else after the fire giants or any kind of other possibilities. But like the monk was really banged up and he went down right away after taking a couple of hits, and they were down some resources even though they had taken a short rest. So they picked a fight. I really thought like there's a potential here for a TPK. They were also down 2 party members, which was somewhat unexpected. And they managed to pull it off mostly because Jorgen is a combat monster. Although, that's not to downplay what the party did. The party's tactics they used some dumb tactics. They used some good tactics. That's the typical combats. But at least I had an out that when they slew Zalto, okay, now we can call an end to this like there's a reason to blow the whistle, time out, okay, combat's over. So that's a recap. Very good. That's what's going on. The whole reason that they went on this thing was I set up a subquest where Jorgen had been captured, all of his equipment had been stolen, and specifically he was looking for his axe. This pays off something that I set up way back in Chapter 1, and now that they've got his axe, we can get out of this subquest and then continue moving forward with the plot. I mean, the good news is it was really sort of part of Chapter 3. The things that happen in Chapter 3, you're supposed to meet Harshnag, and he's just supposed to inherently trust you, which I think is a little, stretches credulity there a little bit. And I liked this storyline played out way, way better. So it was really, cementing that arc of Harshnag goes from beaten, helpless prisoner to achieving his full prowess, where now he's got his plate mail from his father that he inherited. He's got his axe back. He has now resumed his rightful stature as the kick-ass fire giant that he is in the book. I feel like that's really rewarding. I'm just happy with the way that it worked out. So, you know what? Most boring name. I don't know what they were thinking with the 5 fire giants and 2 hellhounds. I honestly don't know. That was especially well. So they had 10 dwarves with them, right? And the other thing that saved their bacon was that squad of 10 dwarves ate a lot of hits. So and only a couple of them went down, and the cleric actually healed those guys up. So there was somebody there to take some of the heat of those fire giants, and literally the heat of the hellhounds. So they pulled it off, but yeah, there was they were over leveraged for their level because they had 10 60 hit point berserkers that they could call upon to intercede, and they also had Jorgen to just to deal out damage. And you know, the thing about having a frost giant on your side is that like he soaks 100 points, maybe 120 points of damage every single time they get into a big boss fight. So he really is taking a lot of heat off of them. You know, we could have a discussion about whether it's undermining the balance of the encounters, but story-wise, I feel like he's serving his purpose and we're moving the story along because of him. And I still feel like they were sweating this combat out. So yes, Jorgen did save their bacon, but it was not a situation where they just sat back and kind of twiddled their thumbs and they were like, oh, we'll let the frost giant handle it, don't worry, we got this, guys. Like, they're not overconfident about it so far. That may change, but so far it has been, you know, they've been sweating bullets, and he's been making clutch plays at the end. And I roll all my dice out in the open, right? So they know how many times Jorgen is getting hit and how much damage he's taking. And, you know, when one of those fire giants crits, that's 12d6 damage. Wham! I'm going to slam on somebody. So it doesn't feel, you know, it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina on the DM's part. They don't know how many hit points he has. They know he's got over, you know, probably over 150. But yeah, so Jorgen is Harshnag, right? So he's an NPC. I run him. I decide what he does. And generally he goes last in the combat, or if there's a big group of friendly NPCs, he goes with that group of friendly NPCs. But generally I let the players kind of like light things up and decide what the tactics are. I will occasionally use Jorgen as a prod where, you know, the party is sort of like standing back, you know, Mexican standoff style, waiting for something to happen. And Jorgen is not a guy who sits around waiting for stuff to happen. He's like, I've got hit points, I've got strength, I've got armor class. Let's start this fight and go. So that's what he did with the Yak Folk Village and the chief, and it was, you know, good. Like, let's move the story along. We're going to have a fight here. It's just a matter of who's going to start it and on what round it's going to be fought. And I'm not going to sit around and wait for, you know, oh, well, the Yak Folk, are they going to come into our, you know, are they going to walk into our trap? Jorgen doesn't use those sort of tactics. He's not stupid, but he's also a giant. Like, he's used to starting stuff, and he's used to finishing stuff. So that's the deal with Jorgen. And he functionally is taking the place of Harshnag from the book. I don't think the party is not gonna have Jorgen and Harshnag. All right, so now we have to pay off the wrap up of chapter 8, right? So I left on sort of like a cliffhangery. I left on sort of like a cliffhangery type of moment where Jorgen basically asserted his authority over the fire giants, and we called the end of combat, and they all sort of stood down, and that was that. Now, I've got a couple issues that I do need to deal with here. So number one, as you can tell, I want to get things moving along to chapter 4 again. Like, from my perspective, we have until the end of March. That's kind of a hard out for the adventure. So I need to start, as I've talked about in previous streams, it's time to pick up the pace on the actual plot. We've like done our exploring. We've gotten our feel for, you know, the North and the Sword Coast. And we've done some traveling. We made some connections and put our feelers out. And we've paid off one story arc for sure. But now let's introduce the next, like the actual, like rising action of the rest of the book, right? So I want to get into chapter 4. That's my goal. We're kind of done with our wandering exploration, develop the characters type of phase of the game. Let's dive into working on fighting, exploring, investigating the specific plot of what's happening, right? So I want to get out of Iron Slag. I don't want to fight any more fire giants. We fought fire giants literally for the last forever and a day. Like, I don't need to fight another fire giant for a while, right? Let me just... I just need to fix my phone here. Sorry about the interruption here. Let's just turn that off. There, we made it go quiet. All right. So, how do we wrap up this chapter? That's my goal. It's a couple issues. I want to reinforce the idea that the ordning is broken, so I want to start emphasizing that part of the plot. So, like I said, we get that idea of the ordning. Jorgen probably knows what the ordning is. He can explain it to the party, why it's important. He's going to be very concerned. How do we do that? We need to demonstrate that in some way. I think what happens is Jorgen orders these guys, you know, you swear allegiance to me, and I am your, you know, the new chief of your clan. And the fire giants look at him and go, the ordning is broken. There are no more rules. We swore allegiance to Duke Zalto before the ordning was shattered. We maintained that, you know, contract because that was the honorable thing to do. But we don't need to live by those rules right now, and we're going to go off and do our own thing. And they sort of like pack up their gear and leave, right? I don't think it's going to be like, oh, let's take everything that's nailed down, but they, you know, retire to their chambers, grab their equipment, and then take off and go do their own thing. And so that'll be kind of an indicator like, oh, this is out of the ordinary. This is not the usual order of operations for fire giant culture and what's been established and how this stuff works. So that will upset Jorgen, if nothing else. So that gives him a reason to, you know, raise this concern about what's going on. If the ordning's been shattered, then what, how does, you know. So I want to introduce that concept through the dispersal of the fire giant forces, that they just pick up and go. We're not serving Zalto anymore, but we're certainly not serving you either. Bye. So that's something. I need to also deal with some sort of like, I want to find a hand-wavy, you know, or cutscene way to wrap up. Okay, you guys find a way to destroy / disable the Voidendad construct. You search the remains of the fire giant. You know, you loot the bedroom of Duke Zalto and the Duchess and find X, Y, and Z, because I think, you know, they found some treasure. I don't want to, you know, because they had the help of Jorgen and the dwarves, I don't want to hand them over, you know, here's every single magic item and you know, gemstone and treasure chest that's located in Iron Slag. But I do feel like, well, we can pay them off with a couple items. So that needs to happen, right? So I want to make sure that when they... I'm planning to just hand wave this whole thing. Like, I just want to kind of like have a one-page narration of, okay, guys, here's what's going to happen. I want to need to fast forward you through this so we can get on to the next thing. So I need to take care of their treasure. I need to make sure that there's some sort of accommodation for what happens with this giant colossus that triggered this whole fight in the first place. Those are the main things. And then Jorgen needs to say, all right, guys, we're going to the temple of Anam the Allfather, right? So that's the wrap up of chapter 8. I don't want to get into, and then you go into this room and there's this, and give me a search check and see if you find this and that. Like, I don't want to get into a detailed ants marching style of you explore the complex. I want to write up a one-page summary and pound out like the high-level details, give them some rewards, give them some closure on this thing, and then let's move on. So, hello, Havana. So, that's the wrap up of chapter 8. That's how I want to handle that. I probably want to include travel to the temple as another hand wavy type of thing. I don't know. I want to montage that, or I may, as I've talked about before, pre-roll some of the random encounters, and I may in fact, pre-roll or at least kind of like get an idea of if I come up with, okay, you get 5 random encounters in your travel along here. If I can decide some quick and easy outcomes, you see a group of elk. Well, great. You know what? I don't need them to decide what to do. Like, you kill a couple, Jorgen eats a couple, everybody's great and happy, blah, blah, blah. Like if I can short circuit a lot of the unnecessary decision making, here's what happens, here's what logically follows, let's keep moving. I think I can get away with that. What's dangerous about these 2 bullet points is it's very railroady. It's very, I'm telling you what's going to happen so that we can keep moving. And you're taking a lot of agency away from the players. But, we have probably 9 sessions left. It's time to move. All right, so that's my goal with travel to chapter 4 is to montage that. The other thing that's possible is I could make a ruling that Jorgen has access to some sort of teleportation magic or ritual that takes them to the temple of Anam the Allfather, right? That's not in the book as written, but I feel like that's a very effective way to short circuit all of this travel time, which does not advance the plot. How could you do that without making it be an easy, an easy access thing where it's like, well, why don't you do that all the time, right? Because that's the danger of introducing this sort of shortcut. It's the old classic, why didn't Gandalf just summon the eagles in the first place and you fly over there, right? Well, there's no real good reason, there's no deeply good reason for that to happen in Lord of the Rings. But we can introduce a reason here in Storm King's Thunder. So I can have him find a ritual book or a scroll in amongst Duke Zalto's possessions, or I could have him find the components for this ritual. Say it costs 10,000 gold pieces to trace the gold runes in this, magical circle that you need to invoke in order to create a portal to the temple of Anam the Allfather. Okay, like now it's not like the Harper teleportation circles where you're like, hey guys, we're headed to Neverwinter, chop chop, away you go, right? Like there's no free pass there. So I think if I tie this into some sort of great expense or some sort of like limited time, like it takes literally 3 days to invoke this ritual and Jorgen is exhausted at the end of those 3 days. Like, that's a cool price to pay. So if there's a consequence attached to just invoking this shortcut travel thing, I think that will keep the players from abusing it and give you a reason like, oh, okay, well, we can't do that now because that would take too long to do, or we don't have enough money to do that, or whatever, or we don't want Jorgen to be exhausted at the end of this trip, what have you. So I think that actually, that will work out. That's probably a really expedient and convenient and believable, a plausible way for the players to fast travel to the temple. So having just talked through it, I feel like that's probably the best way to get away from having to hand wave railroad them through a bunch of random encounters. They're going to essentially sort of like start fast traveling now anyhow, so let's introduce some elements. They've already got access to the inner circles. Theoretically at the end of, or the middle of chapter 4, however you want to look at it, they get access to an airship that's provided by the cult of the dragon, etc. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to introduce the fact that, oh, okay, well, Jorgen knows this thing, but he doesn't like to use it, and he can't use it without the right materials or whatever, or having to pay the price for doing it. Maybe it's all three of those things. Maybe it takes 2 days, or 24 hours or whatever, and it costs 10,000 gold pieces, and he's exhausted at the end of it. So I'll have to think about what the price tag is going to be, but I like the idea of Jorgen gets very worried about the ordning being broken, needs answers as quickly as possible. Come on, guys, we're going to this place, but I am going to do this thing that I don't normally do. It adds some drama and some stakes to the idea of visiting the temple, right? Like, if Jorgen is willing to drop 12 grand in gold to fast travel to this place, the fact that the ordning is broken must be a big deal. He's taking this very seriously. You don't just frivolously drop that kind of money, undergo this sort of ritual and ordeal to go someplace if there's not a pressing danger. And I feel like there's been danger in, the threat of the frost giants, and it's clear that they're roaming loose, but I don't think it hurts to reinforce that to the players, that the stakes are, it's time to crank up the stakes on the situation. So I think that addresses our travel to chapter 4. So let's just talk briefly through what happens in chapter 4, right? So there's a number of different things. I have some mixed feelings because I'm trying to keep things moving along, right? So let's crack open our little. Oh, look, guys, they match. I can't turn my finger the right way. They match. So some things that happen here in chapter 4. They go into the Eye of the Allfather. They encounter a group of Uthgardt barbarians. For me personally, in my game, now there's an opportunity where they could be encountering the same group that they encountered before in the swamp. That would be an interesting callback, and I like that idea, and enough time has passed that they could have gotten there. So that's good. They're clearly supposed to be murdered, right? Like, it's set up that Wormblood, the chief of this barbarian expedition, is hostile no matter what, even if they try and offer him, access to the temple and whatnot so that he can consult the oracle. But he still attacks them. So it's not an encounter that has a lot of it's not brimming with possibility, right? It's mostly a question of, do you surprise these guys or not? And if you do you attack them right away? And if you don't, do they attack you right away, or do they talk to you and then attack you? So I don't know. It's a fight. It has some magical items at the end of it. You can get a supernatural gift out of it. Okay. I mean, to me, it's one of those things where when I'm looking at editing the plot, I might just edit that piece of it out because I don't feel like I necessarily need a fight there. Not to mention, once they enter the temple itself, they have to find the frost giant, you know, artifact, quote unquote, and they have to go through another fight in order to acquire that thing. And not only that, but it's not clear where it is, so they may be wandering around the complex a little bit, which may end up triggering some unnecessary fights. So, so if that's the case, then I don't know that I need to have that encounter with the barbarians. I don't know that there's a huge payoff there. It's not really a role-playing encounter, and there's not a lot of forks that come off of what happens with that thing. They're more or less a kind of a roadblock or a speed bump, right? They're really just a speed bump. Okay, well, is that necessary? I don't think so. So I'm tempted to edit that out. I'm strongly inclined to edit that out. So then they get in. There's going to be some time exploring and kind of dicking around with the statues and whatnot. You know, maybe Jorgen has an idea of how the stuff works, but you know, they encounter these various runes that are on the floor. Do they recognize those? Blah blah blah. And then on top of it, once they do manage to access the oracle, there's the whole scene with the corpse of the ghost of the murdered giant, and there's interrogating the oracle, etc. And the more that I talk about all the stuff that's in this thing, the more I feel like this is far too much for one session, right? And I'd like to condense this down and get the meat of this down to one session, if at all possible. So we get rid of the barbarians. We can streamline the location of the frost giant artifact so that they can access the oracle. We have a scene there. We'll have some RP with asking the oracle questions and talking to this ghost, right? So that's going to happen. And then they get, another quest to go back out into the world and prove their allegiance, prove themselves worthy. I'm not a big fan of the way that this hook works out. At least not the way that it's played out in my game, right? So in the adventure as written, Jorgen meets up with the players and says, I think you're really cool. Let me take you to this place where I think some cool stuff is going to happen so we can find out some answers. And then the oracle says, well, I think you're pretty cool, but I want you to prove that you're cool. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but that's ostensibly like the way the mission works out. And then they go back and go out into the Sword Coast and have to visit these various places, the burial mounds of the various Uthgardt tribes, right? I feel like in my game, they've already proved their allegiance and ability to support the Giants' cause, right? They've shown their good faith and intent to work with Jorgen and help him and aid his cause, and he's clearly on the side of good. Therefore, I don't want him to I don't want the Oracle to like be questioning their good nature and questioning their nature and intent, right? That doesn't make sense to me. So I need to find an alternate hook for why the Oracle would send them back out to find this stuff. I mean, honestly, what I probably should do is take a look at how many sessions we have left and how much is left in the book and decide, do I eliminate this subquest altogether? Do I chop this whole thing clean out and the Oracle says, okay, you have brought me X and such, and here's what's going on, here you go. One of the things I'm concerned about is that will underlevel the party, that we might be advancing the plot a little too fast. We might be throwing a lot at them, and it might advance them into areas where they're 7th level, but they need help. And I've got 2 players who missed a session too, so they're missing some XP, right? So I'm struggling with. I'm not particularly a fan of, you're not worthy, prove your worth. And I don't want to give them a ton of. It's positioned in the module where it's like, well, the more giants that you snuff out, the more paths that you have to finish the final conflict. And I don't know that we have time to do a bunch of, let's assault the Hill Giants' lair, and let's go take out Svartborg, and let's go deal with the Stone Giant Valley and all that sort of stuff, right? I think ideally we have time for one, but do we have time to go off and do the burial mounds and then on top of it go and attack Svartborg or whatever? I don't know. I've got a good hook set up, like Jorgen has a strong motivation to go attack Svartborg and avenge his father's death. And I think the party would love to take part in that. They're really firm compatriots of Jorgen, so I think following his quest line, or following a quest line set out by him, is not railroady and is not necessarily taking the spotlight off of them and making the story all about this giant's quest for vengeance or to do what's right. But I think it definitely helps that they're coupled together. I feel like I think they're a party. They're all in this thing together. And barring a bunch, I don't have strong motivations for them individually or through the use of factions to go and do these quests. So hitching their motivation to Jorgen's motivation to make things right and to get vengeance actually works out pretty good. So that's something I need to pick up the book, and I need to start mapping out, okay, what are these last sessions? How much of this book are we going to tackle? Because right now we're in chapter 4, and we could come back into chapter 3 and do some exploration, and then go off into one of the various, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, giant fortresses, and do another assault, and then come back and get our main quest to go on and tackle the end game. But it feels like, under the constrained timeline that I have, I need to start compressing and pushing forward. So I'll take a look at that and make some decisions about how that's going to work and how I want to do some selective editing on the plot going forward. But I want to talk briefly about the Uthgardt Barbarian burial mounds and that subquest, and going forward, if I were to go forward with that, if I do go forward with that, how I want to tackle that. So I am personally uncomfortable with the idea that the Uthgardt Barbarians stole some stuff from the Giants, or I'm not sure that that's even exactly how it's positioned, right? Let's see if we can take a look at how it's positioned. Quest for the Giants relics. Lithgard Barbarian Spirit Mounds. So let's just take a look at human barbarians. Fought our kind, stole our relics, burying them in the ground. They built altars to their god king atop these relics and surrounded their altars with burial mounds. Go to these mounds, retrieve one or more of our lost relics, and bring them here as tribute. Okay, so here's the approach and my thinking and my interpretation of the premise that's laid out here. I am 100% on board with the Lithgard Barbarians fought our kind, stole stuff from the giants that they slew, and essentially made altars to their god around these relics, right? Like, that's pretty cool fantasy trope. That's fairly standard. We're using items of power to supplicate our vengeful god, etc. Like, that part of it I'm down with. Like, that's their religion, that's cool. The part of it that kind of skeezes me a little bit and makes me uncomfortable with the real world connotations is the part where they created burial mounds around these artifacts and items. And maybe it's because I come from a part of the country where, like, you could literally drive 2 miles out of town and go through a park that was set up around Native American burial mounds. Like, I remember walking in, it would say, "Welcome to the park. These are Native American burial mounds. Please do not disturb them." And of course, there was some a-hole who would, like, "Oh, I found, arrowheads and things like that." I don't remember there being people who, like, were actively digging, but I remember there being that kind of like, "Hey, keep an eye out because every once in a while, there's a washout from a gully or whatever, and you can find, Indian arrowheads or, whatever, beads or whatever." And so admittedly, D&D comes with a certain amount of we're looting graves, okay? It's a little more acceptable when it's the crypt of some vampire lord, that has, medieval connotations, and essentially you're stealing from rich white people, right? Like that's how a lot of what I personally, and I think that's sort of the default assumption is, okay, you go to the Elf King's tomb or whatever and take that stuff. Like, you're not desecrating that tomb. You're claiming what he's not using, right? And that's okay in my opinion. Like, that's you can create moral quandaries around that, but it doesn't, at least to my perception, inherently carry any sort of cultural burden to it. However, I feel like going and essentially sort of desecrating or invading a barbarian tribe's burial mounds, and they're very clearly described as savage people who just wear skins, they don't wear armor, they keep to themselves, they don't like civilization, they're warring on civilization, etc. Like, there's enough baggage there. While that may not be the direct inspiration, there's enough baggage there that it bleeds off into you're going to go desecrate Native American burial mounds. So my suggestion for this particular issue is to get rid of the idea that there's burial mounds there. Like, let's just dispense with that notion altogether and say that they have built altars to their god, Uthgar, their god king, and he has demanded tribute, and they are using these giant relics as tribute to their god and as magical or ritualistic devices that feed him power or something like that, right? Well, I have much more, it's much easier for me to send the players after the items that are powering a capricious foreign god. And maybe that makes me a hypocrite, but we can paint Uthgar the God King any way that we want. And that's also a very standard fantasy trope of interrupt the ritual to the menacing god of the evil NPCs or whatever. So, I mean, that's a big way to get around this. It's a big way to get around this particular issue of sensitivity. I don't know that the players at my table would tune into that or feel uncomfortable by it or raise an eyebrow or whatever. They probably would not care. I, as the DM, like me as a person, I care. So for me, I want to, if we end up doing this particular side quest, based on my earlier discussion, I'm not convinced that we will. But if we were, I would definitely focus it more around it being tribute, that these things are guarded by them to protect the power of Uthgar, the God King, and maybe, that gives you some opportunity to have sort of weird divine effects, etc., that they have in some of these things. And that way you don't come into this whole kind of bizarre question of what's the morality of doing this? Is this some sort of statement on anything that has a corollary in the real world? Like, let's heighten the elements of the fantastic that are already there, and I want to diminish the connections and relationship to the various cultural elements that make me, personally uncomfortable. Because I think if they were actual, like if it was an actual analog to a Native American burial ground, then I want to paint the Uthgar barbarians in a far more interesting and sympathetic light than they're really portrayed in the adventure. In the adventure, they're savages that you can barely negotiate with. So that's something that I've been thinking about since I cracked the book open and came across that thing, and I've been waiting for the opportunity to talk about it, and today was that day. So if you're thinking about delving into chapter 4 and the way that the book is currently, the adventure is currently structured, I strongly encourage you to revisit that, think about it, just reflect on it, right? Like, listen, if it makes me uncomfortable, that's my deal, right? And it's going to affect the way I play the game. If in your game, you don't care and your players don't care, and that's cool for you, that's cool for you. That's your game. But what I would encourage you to do is at least take a moment and reflect on, what does this mean? What sort of statement are we making in the game? Is it going to raise eyebrows? Who would it bother? Especially if you're playing an Adventurers League game where you have ostensibly, a group of strangers at your table and not necessarily guys that you're very close, lifelong best friends with or that you've been gaming with for years upon years. Then I think it behooves you have a responsibility to stop and take a moment and go, is this going to raise any red flags for someone and make someone uncomfortable? And if so, is it necessary to present it as written? So I think if you just take that step and have that moment of reflection and consideration, that's all I can, as somebody in the gaming community who's concerned about the way that we sometimes get portrayed. Like, that's all I want you to do. It would be great if you decided, oh, okay, this is not for me or whatever, or if you agreed with my point of view, sure, I would be understanding and happy and love to have a further discussion about it. If you don't agree and it doesn't bother you and you don't care, fine, but just have that moment of consideration and reflection. That's all I want you to do. So that's my short, little, I don't know, social justice warrioring for what it's worth. Look, you can do all kinds of weird, nasty, skeezy, disrespectful things in your game if everybody in your game is on board with it, and if they have an out for when it crosses a line that they're uncomfortable with. Fine, have at it. Like whatever you want to do with you. It's your game. Have fun, but also don't get up at my nose when I go, well, this makes me uncomfortable and feels like it's attached to something in the real world that seems very exploitative. So there we go. That's where we're at with that's where I'm at with chapter 4. So I think I'm going to do some selective editing. I don't know that we're going to continue this like the plot strictly as written, because I want to go through and just sort of like look at the schedule and then beat out how many sessions I think this can take. I think I'll also get a feel for this tomorrow when we sit down and play and see how long it takes them to actually get through the temple, because I'd like to think that this is going to move fast, right? I always like to think that, and that's the problem, is I always like to think that it's going to move fast, and then it takes a lot longer, and they dilly-dally around. Our party doesn't have... We have a lot of guys who have ideas, but we don't have one, like, unifying leader or pair of unifying leaders who go, this is what we're doing, guys, and everybody else goes, sounds great, let's go. There's always, I want to go check this out, and they're always inclined to start a fight and loot stuff, which seems like should be a very simple motivation, but when you got plot to feed to them, then it starts to get difficult, because they may want to go hit the punching bag of the barbarians camped at the door, when really you're like, let's get into this oracle part of the thing and maybe do some role playing with this ghost and stuff like that. We've also had a lot of really heavy combat sessions lately, and when it goes back to, we talk about varying the plot and varying the tempo of what's going on and what types of encounters you have in the game, and I'd love this particular session to start feeding a lot of information out there, having RP interaction with different elements and whatnot, having them realize what's at stake and what's happening, and maybe, have some more deep discussions with Jorgen, and not get bogged down into an hour-and-a-half fight with 5 fire giants and 2 hellhounds, and holy crap, like we might get TPK'd. So that's... it's a real moment of like, let's take a pause, let's let's focus things in, let's zero things in on the plot elements that we need to like put our targeting crosshairs on, and let's move forward in an expeditious way instead of kind of tactically crawling through the dungeon and exploring and rolling and checking and collecting and searching and I found this and who wants this thing, and that, that can be, you can have a 20-minute discussion about who's going to get a sword, right? Okay, well, that's fine and it's necessary to have that discussion, but at the end of the day, you spent 20 minutes and the only result is, okay, the dwarf gets the sword. Well, that's great, but it doesn't advance the plot whatsoever. So, that's where we're at. We got about 5 minutes left. Oh, Sci-Fi T-Rex, you want me to scream Ever-Burning Lanthorn of Nidox at the very end. I didn't last time. Okay, well, when I roll the credits, if I hit the calendar screen perfectly at the end, I will scream. Well, I can't scream because I'm in my apartment, but I will yell Ever-Burning Lanthorn of Nidox for you at the end. If you guys have other questions or suggestions about how this session is going to play out, or how the game is playing out, where we're at, I'm happy to entertain those. I really do feel like this is a big opportunity to start zooming in and and chopping things up, or not. I don't think that's not the proper term, right? So when I talk about editing, yes, I'm talking about cutting things out, okay? But what I don't want to do is have things feel disjointed. What I want to do is remove things and then streamline the plot and the action. So rather than going like this, I mean literally the plot kind of like goes here, comes back around, and then you go in a different direction, right? Well, let's go here and then go in the different direction. Let's not do this little hitch and a loop, right? Ostensibly, you come into the temple, you get sent on a quest for giant artifacts, and then you get information that sends you back on on another quest. So let's remove some of those loops in the action. And keep in mind, I'm not saying this like it's a criticism of the module. It may come across that way, and I do not want to give that impression, that it's somehow a criticism of the design and the structure here. I think it's actually a very good design and structure because it's very modular, very plug and play. And actually, if I want to pick this up and play it again with the same group or a different group, there's whole bunches of areas that are left unexplored that you could now send them into, and they would have a different experience even if they knew the most of the meta plot, right? The reason that I talk about streamlining all of this stuff is I'm feeling the time pressure because I'm running an Adventurers League game. I'm not running an open-ended game in my home campaign where I have time to let them kind of spread their wings and feel their oats and check out this little area of the complex and go off and do this thing and maybe have side quests or not have side quests or whatever, but where I'm not concerned about I've got a hard out and I gotta get going again. Because come the first week in April, I'm guessing, the new season of Adventurers League starts, and it's a new book, it's a new adventure, it's first level characters, it's a new party, and wherever you were at, you're done. So all of this, what might seem like hand-wringing over let's, trim the module down, is not a criticism that there's extraneous parts to the module or there's a structure that I don't necessarily agree with or whatever. It is strictly me trying to bring everything into focus so that I can give my party a climactic ending to this adventure that is the actual ending of the adventure and pays off in a way that they feel satisfied with and that they don't feel like they were rushed into it, right? So Havana, have you never heard that expression, feel their oats? Feel their oats? That's, yeah, feel your oats. That's, usually it's used in reference to like a young man goes out into the world and he's on his own for the first time and he has to, is it sow your oats? Maybe it's sow your oats. Sow your oats sounds a lot more more skeezy. Most boring name says, are you hesitant to just split the treasure out at the PCs in order to speed up the game and get them to the Oracle ASAP? Spit the treasure out. Is it sow their oats? I think there's a feel your oats too. Listen, you have the time to bring up El Googolo del Searcho and check it out. So, is it really feel your oats a drag queen thing? Okay, that's not the context that I've usually heard it, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. Am I hesitant to just spit the treasure out of the PCs in order to speed up the game and get them to the Oracle ASAP? I'm not that hesitant to. I think what I'm going to do with the treasure and whatnot is I'm going to come up with, like I did coming into this particular subquest, come up with a one-pager of, okay guys, here's what happens. And give them a one-page handout that's essentially boxed text that explains, you find this and this, Jorgen is upset when this and this happens. He commits to doing this and this type of ritual so that you can go to the oracle. That's what needs to happen next. And then, we can have some discussion of who wants these 3 magic items that were in the thing or whatever it ends up being, and here's how X much gold that you find, etc. I may even put that together like later tonight or tomorrow or something like that, so that they can read it ahead of time, in terms of like how much gold and items that they get. But I'm not very hesitant to hand wave montage this wrap up. That I don't feel bad about that at all. So, all right. Well, it is 3 o'clock. Fuck what? I'm very hesitant to click on this Urban Dictionary link. Yeah, feeling is oats. That's yeah. That is exactly how I meant it. They have their assertive or excited behavior. Sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. All right. See, I feel like I used it correctly. All right. Hey, let's take a look at what's going on the rest of the week. There's been some minor changes to the calendar here. Tonight, it is Hoy Chummer, the Shadowrun game, DM'd by Mr. Tyler Rhodes himself. If you joined us last night for Monday Night Dungeon Fight, Kelsey Osborne, who's in tonight's game, she did an admirable job and was this close, spoiler alert, this close to taking the evening's championship title home. Unfortunately, she was not victorious. But Kelsey will be there tonight playing in the Shadowrun game, Hoy Chama. So tune in for that if you love yourself some fantasy sci-fi. Hello, Mr. Mace. Tomorrow night is Misadventures, our Harry Potter RPG, sort of loosely based on the Pathfinder system. I don't know that it's loosely based. I guess I would say it's a hacked version of the Pathfinder system. And that is our all-ladies game, which is DM'd by Ms. Talene Guerra. So tune in for that. She works hard to bring you a cool game, so I reward her with your eyeballs. That is that is not something that I necessarily wanted to say, but it just came out that way. Reward her with your eyeballs. Later in the week, Thursday, I am back at 2 o'clock with Disorganized Play. So we will come back, meet right here in front of the interrogation bulb, and talk about what actually ended up happening in my game tomorrow night, my Adventurers League game. So you will be able to watch that, or at least come back and hear how it all went horribly wrong, as it typically does. How my players, as the British would say, threw a spanner in the works. So that's going on, and then I just want to give you a heads up. At 4:30 over on Geek and Sundry, I will be DMing another installment of Bearded Men West's Dungeons & Dragons, the improvised campaign, so I hope you will join me for that. That should be interesting. I'm not sure who the main character is going to be this week. We may pick up, we sort of ended on a cliffhanger with Adrian Steinhardt. Is he dead? Is he not dead? So we may pick that up and try and see how that plays out. That'll be interesting. That's at 4:30 Pacific. At 8:30 tomorrow on Thursday night, I have time for games, video games with Gaurav Galati, the GXG. So I'm not sure what Gaurav is going to be playing, but that's not important, right? That's not important. Friday at 7:30, Mr. David Crennan is here with Never Tell Me the Odds, our Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. Always trouble. Always trouble. So that's Friday night. You can jump in on that. And then Saturday, change of plans. There's no masks at noon on Saturday. There will not be any masks. So if you had fun watching Jordan and Nicole last night in Monday Night Dungeon Fight, and I will say, it was a triumphant return of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. That was a lot of fun. I really had a lot of fun running that game last night. Unfortunately, you will not be able to see their antics on Saturday in our Teen Titans-inspired Masks game. Sorry about that. But at 5 o'clock, you'll be able to watch Phoenix Dawn Command with a crew of admirable and enjoyable misfits. So that's our schedule for the week. There's no painting on Sunday. That's your time to sit back with your YouTubes and catch up on all the great offerings we have here on Saving Throw Show. So that is our prep session for Disorganized Play. As you can tell, I have some work ahead of me before tomorrow night's session. I am looking forward to it. You know, I do think I always like an opportunity to change up the pace, and I'm especially enthusiastic about the fact that we're going to get the plot moving and I don't have to plan a very tactical, detailed battle that's going to eat up a bunch of time. I would like to give the players a little bit of time to breathe, but also keep things moving and get some plot elements stirring in their minds as opposed to getting their bloodlust stirring and their swords in their fists. So, that is Disorganized Play. Thanks to everyone for joining me. Thanks to Farquaad for modding. Thanks to all of our regulars out there. You can support us on Patreon, or you can become a Twitch subscriber. That's a really easy, simple thing for you to do. We appreciate you just spreading the word. So thanks so much for being a fan. And until next time, let's dungeon. Sorry,